Senator Roberts, thank you for your patience. It is your turn. You have the call.
Thank you. And thank you for being here tonight. My questions are concise and straightforward, and hopefully the answers will be the same so that the Chair is not disappointed. In the context of the mass release from immigration detention of approximately 150 non-citizens awaiting to be deported, how many of these detainees were in fact released as a result of the decision in NZYQ?
Oh, Senator Roberts, I'm very, very sorry. When you asked me whether we were talking about migration in outcome 2, we are, but the matters you're raising with those questions are relevant to outcome 3, and we'll be dealing with that tomorrow.
There you go, you got an early night.
10 o'clock finish. Well done, Senator Roberts.
Do you have other questions? I thought there were more general questions about migration numbers. I apologise.
No,
I've just listened to so many of your Senate speeches, Senator Roberts. I thought I was preempting your questions, but we will be here tomorrow to ask questions of the Border Force, particularly around those issues.
And also immigration, I hope.
Sorry?
Immigration as well. Home Affairs.
There's other questions that might be relevant to outcome 2. If you want to put them, they might have the officials here for you.
No, these are to do with legality of immigration.
So, Senator, I think if I can help,
if you could assist,
because the questions relating to the High Court case cover both outcomes 2 and 3, we typically try and cover them as a group together, so we're not saying, oh, we can answer a little bit of that and not the rest of that. But if there are more general questions on the migration program, then we should be able to answer them for you tonight.
These are more to do with the legalities and what's happening about removing people. So I think
it's the same cohort of questions. Is that right?
I think they are.
They're related to the same issues.
If they're related to the same cohort, it's probably sensible to do them tomorrow as a batch.
The same cohort and a similar cohort. That's all. I think it'll be next tomorrow.
I'll deal with them tomorrow.
I predict there will be many questions around this issue in the morning, so you'll be in good company.
Perhaps one might be covered off now, Chair, the last one I had. Visas requiring accommodation in 2019 were 1.9 million people. In 2024, at the start of the year, it was 2.3 million, plus students of over 500,000, plus a mix of higher percentage of non-productive people. Housing demand has been driven through the roof and prices and rents are skyrocketing. We're in a per capita recession. We have been for 3 quarters. So, Minister, it appears to a lot of Australians like the government doesn't want to be tagged as the government that took us into recession, so they're flooding the country with migrants to avoid a technical recession. Having said correctly that we're already in we've had 3 quarters of a per capita recession. So the government, to me, seems to be uncaring. When will, about the plight of Australians, and you know that in our state's capital city, there are people living under bridges, in cars, in caravans, and I'm talking about working families coming home with their 2 kids to sleep in a car. I don't know where do they go to the toilet and where they shower, and we've got it right up the coast, not just in our capital city, but right up the coast. The Labor government must remove visa holders. When will Labor resolve the housing crisis and stop the out-of-control and unsustainable growth of Australia's population? We had 750,000 come in last year.
Senator Roberts. Sorry, was there...
I'm not sure that 750,000 figure is correct, Senator Roberts, but the point really is that the government does believe that migration levels have been unsustainably high. We believe that that is a direct result from the failures of Mr Dutton and other coalition ministers to manage the migration program correctly, and that is exactly why we have dramatically reduced the grants of international student visas, and that is why we are on track to halve what's known as the net overseas migration figure by next financial year. So if you look at the numbers where they were when we came into office and post-COVID, we are on track to halve that figure by next financial year. But when it comes to, I think the 750,000 figure I don't think is correct, Senator Roberts. What's known as the net overseas migration, which I
wasn't implying that was net, that was incoming.
Well, you've also got to look at the number of people going out
Correct,
as well.
But 750,000 people coming in is a heck of a lot of people.
Yeah, sure.
It's way above the previous record.
Agree.
Way above.
Agreed. And that's, as I said, our government believes that migration has been too high, and that's why we've taken a range of steps to reduce it, and we're on track to achieve that target. The point about housing, it's obviously a matter for a different committee, but as I've pointed out to you before, Senator Roberts, it would really help if we could get your vote in the Senate when we try to spend more money on housing, and unfortunately so far you haven't.
How many houses have you built, Minister? Zero.
We've committed about $32 billion worth of funding.
You have committed how much to housing? You've committed 32 billion. You've committed 20 billion to a housing future fund.
We committed of the 32 billion that we have committed for housing. 10 billion was for the Housing Australia Future Fund, and unfortunately both you and Senator Hanson voted against that with the coalition.
We don't want more bureaucracy. We want tradies to be set loose. That's why we did it.
But the vote was about creating a housing fund, and you voted against it. You voted for less spending on housing.
Senators, I don't think it's
10 billion.
I don't think it's relevant. Senator Roberts.
How many houses have been built in the last
Roberts,
2 years?
your question.
Well, you probably need to go to the
okay, let's come back to my question.
Minister,
as the Chair's
if you could
reminding
assist
us.
me in not speaking over me while Senator Roberts, I give you some direction. The question you have ultimately ended up asking is not relevant to this committee. It's probably why you've received a response of the kind Minister Watt has given you. If you have more questions in relation to migration, this is the outcome to put them. Otherwise, we will be back tomorrow with outcome 3.
With due respect, Chair, this is not. This is calling out Senator Watt because he has not answered my question.
No, Senator Roberts, you can say it with all due respect and then continue to talk over me when I've given you a direction as the Chair to ask a relevant question, or I can give the call to someone else who has relevant questions.
Thank you, Chair. The question for the Minister is the same. When will Labor government remove visa holders to ease the pressure on housing in this country?
Sorry, you're saying we should have zero migration to Australia?
We should have negative until we get the housing pressure and the infrastructure to catch up.
What do you mean by negative migration?
More people leave than come.
Forcing people to leave?
More people leave than come.
That's net migration.
Well, the government's policy is to halve the net increase in migration or net migration numbers by next financial year, and we are well on track to do that. We agree that we have a housing shortage in Australia, and that's why we've devoted so much money towards that project. We also recognise that we do have a range of jobs that there is not enough people to fill them. If you speak to any building firm in Queensland, they'll tell you they need more people. We're funding a lot of training of locals as well, but the reality is we do need some level of migration to fill those jobs. If you go to any aged care facility in Queensland or Australia, and I go to one pretty regularly to visit a family member, you will see lots of migrant workers there, and our aged care system would collapse if we did what you suggested, which is stop migration. So it's about a balancing act to make sure that we don't have too much migration in this country, as was occurring under the policy settings we inherited from the former government, while still making sure that we can deliver the workforce that we need.
So, Minister, is it true that under John Howard's Prime Ministership the immigration was dramatically increased and it's stayed high since then under both parties, both Labor and Liberal National Party governments?
I think my recollection is that the major change under the Howard government was a big shift towards temporary migration. I don't know what the overall figures were under the Howard government, but
I think it went from 80,000 to over 130,000, and then it went up under Labor, Rudd Gillard, and the subsequent LNP governments to over 230,000 net.
I don't know.
And now, what are you proposing this next year?
We're proposing that net overseas migration next financial year would be, it's in the order of 240,000, 260,000.
That's still very, very high.
And it's about half of what it was a year or so ago.
This year?
Well,
22, 23.
yes,
Senator Watt, Senator Watt, I could say you're much taller than me. That's not saying much.
A competition of the shortest man in Parliament.
No,
Let's
but
put
you're
Senator
much taller
Farrell in
than I
there
am.
as
That's
well.
not saying
Senator
much.
Ghosh, do you qualify?
So my point is 250 is
But
still
big
a
in
lot.
heart, Senator Roberts. Big in heart.
250,000 is a lot. It's not.
Be respectful
It might be a
of our
halving.
differences
250,000 is
and our similarities.
250,000, maybe a half, but it's still very, very high, and it's putting a lot of pressure on housing.
I agree, which again is why we.
Do we agree?
I agree that migration has been too high, again, and it is putting pressure on housing, which is why we would have really liked your vote for the Housing Australia Future Fund. That's another committee.
I want to stay on immigration.
Me too.
And well, there's two parts of the equation. It's about
That's right. You're
immigration
driving up
and building
demand
more
for housing. You're driving up demand for housing.
If we had more homes, we mightn't have such an issue with migration numbers, but we don't have the homes, and that's what we're trying to fix. But migration numbers, we are halving them. International student grants in April are down 38% on last year's levels. We've taken a whole range of other actions to crack down on some of the rorts in the migration system that were left behind by Mr Dutton and his colleagues. But equally, as I say, if you want to have people look after your family members in aged care, they're not all going to come locally. If you want people to build the homes, they're not all going to come locally. If you want people to be working in hospitals, they're not only going to come locally. And if we actually said close the door entirely to migration, you're going to have a lot of people waiting to get into emergency departments. You're going to have a lot of people waiting to get into aged care homes, etc., etc.
That's the state our country is in right now.
Well,
you're going to build 250,000 new homes next year to accommodate the 250,000 new people coming in?
I've given you direction
Well,
about
again,
what those
you have-
questions are relevant to this committee.
How is $250,000 new net migrants a low number simply because it's half of what the previous one was? It's
Well-
not. It's a very high number.
The departmental officials could probably take you through the work that was undertaken to determine that figure, and I would be confident that in developing that figure, they took into account the need to reduce migration, the pressure on the housing system, but also the workforce needs of hospitals, aged care facilities, construction firms, etc. It would be interesting to know what the opposition did in arriving at the various different figures we've heard from them. I mean, I don't know if anyone from the opposition here can tell us what their policy
They're not here
actually
to
is.
give evidence,
But
Minister Watt.
there's a lot of work gone on the government
They're here
side
to
to come
ask
up with the right
questions.
figure.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Roberts. Is that the end of your questions?
Yes, it is.
We might see
Until
you
tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow, Senator Roberts.